The ocean was whispering that afternoon, calm and glittering, pretending to be kind. I remember standing by the pool, my skin still warm from the sun, when I heard it, the laughter. My daughter-in-law's laughter. Sharp, careless, cruel in that effortless way only arrogance can be. "We're all couples," she was saying through the open window, her voice drifting over the sound of waves. "So we get the master. My parents, the guest room. Your mother's just a lonely old widow. As far as I'm concerned, she can sleep on the floor." I stood, frozen, a towel clenched in my hands, drops of water slipping from my hair onto the wooden deck. That sentence, "sleep on the floor," rang in my head like a bell I couldn't unhear. It was my 70th birthday weekend. I'd spent $3,000 renting this beautiful Cape Cod beach house, the one with the ocean view Harold and I had dreamed about visiting before he passed. I'd stocked the fridge with my son David's favorite craft beers and Ashley's organic snacks. I'd bought flowers for every room, even special pillows for their guests, her parents, Richard and Linda Hartwell. I'd wanted everything to feel perfect, warm, like family. But from where I stood, dripping by the sliding door, I realized I'd paid for my own humiliation. Inside, I could hear David's low chuckle. "You're right, babe. Mom won't mind. She's adaptable these days." Adaptable. That's what people called you when you were trying not to drown after losing your husband of 48 years. When you learned to eat alone, sleep alone, smile alone, so no one else had to feel uncomfortable around your grief. I remember looking at my reflection in the glass door, sunburnt cheeks, silver hair damp and tangled, and thinking, adaptable. Maybe. But not stupid. When I finally stepped inside, the house looked like a magazine spread, white walls, blue accents, sunlight pouring through big windows. Too beautiful for the ugliness that had just crawled into it. I moved quietly to my purse, pulled out the rental agreement with my name printed clearly at the top, Margaret Peterson. All of it, every cent mine. The thought steadied me. I wasn't a helpless old widow. I was a woman with a plan, and suddenly, I knew I'd be needing one. By the time David came downstairs smiling in his perfect pressed khaki shorts, I was composed. "Oh, there you are, Mom," he said, as if nothing had happened. "We were wondering where you went." I smiled back. "Just getting some water after my swim. The pool's perfect." Then Richard and Linda emerged from the guest room. Kind people with soft eyes and gentle manners. "Margaret, this place is incredible," Linda said warmly. "You've really outdone yourself. That word you was like a balm." For a moment, I remembered why I'd wanted them here. Then Ashley swept down the stairs like a magazine model come to life, her designer sundress floating around her. "Margaret," she said deliberately, avoiding Mom, "this house is gorgeous. You really went all out." "I'm glad everyone likes it," I replied evenly. David kissed my cheek. "It's perfect, Mom. Ashley and I already moved our things into the master, and her parents are settled in the guest room. Hope that works for you." I felt my smile tighten like a thread about to snap. "Of course," I said softly. "I'm just happy everyone's comfortable." Richard frowned. "But Margaret, where will you sleep? Did you book another room?" Before I could answer, Ashley jumped in. "Oh, Mom's very low maintenance," she said lightly. "She said she'd be fine on the pull-out sofa in the den. Didn't you, Margaret?" Her tone was pure sugar with a steel hook underneath. "It's fine," I answered, though my voice came out a little too calm. "I'm just glad we're all together." Linda's brow furrowed, but she didn't press. Ashley's smile didn't falter, though her jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. The dinner that followed felt like theater, the kind where everyone's pretending not to notice the knife on the table. Ashley raised her glass. "To this beautiful weekend David and I planned for our dear Margaret." My wine burned going down. David smiled. "To Mom for being such a good sport about everything." Richard blinked, confused. "Didn't Margaret plan and pay for this entire weekend?" he asked slowly. Ashley's smile wavered for the first time. "Well, of course Margaret helped with logistics," she said quickly, "but David and I wanted to do something special for her." Linda frowned. "That's odd." "Ashley, you called me 3 days ago and said Margaret invited us." Ashley's eyes flashed. "Mom, you're misremembering." But the damage was done. The lie cracked open right there at the table. Linda looked at me, then her expression shifting from confusion to quiet realization. As I poured more wine, I felt something inside me settle into place. The anger cooled into clarity. They thought I was soft. They thought I'd take whatever scraps they handed me. But this lonely old widow still knew how to make an entrance, and tomorrow they were going to remember whose name was on that lease. I woke before the sun, as I always do, my body still tuned to the rhythm of early mornings with Harold. The house was hushed, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant shush of waves rolling in. I wrapped myself in a robe and stepped out onto the deck. The sky was a watercolor of pale pinks and golds, the kind of dawn that makes you feel like the world is giving you one more chance to choose who you're going to be. I stood there breathing in the salty air when I heard the low murmur of voices drifting from the slightly open window of the guest room. Linda's voice floated out tight with worry. "I don't understand what's happened to her, Richard. The way she spoke about Margaret last night, taking credit for everything. That's not how we raised her." Richard sighed, a sound that carried years of disappointment. "She's always been ambitious," he said quietly. "But this is different. This is dishonest and cruel." I leaned against the railing, feeling that strange mix of sadness and relief. It hurts to hear other people finally see what you've known for a while, but it's also a kind of validation, the universe whispering, "You're not crazy. This is real." By 8 a.m., the house began to stir. I was on the lower deck with a book open in my lap when Ashley stepped out onto the balcony of the master bedroom, the room I had chosen for myself when I booked the house. She stretched lazily in the silk pajamas I'd given her last Christmas and looked over the water like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Good morning, Margaret," she called down, her voice bright with fake sweetness. "Sleep well on the sofa." The way she lingered on that last word told me she remembered every syllable of what she'd said about the floor. "Wonderfully," I called back, my smile easy, my voice light. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Richard and Linda joined me moments later, both dressed, both carrying the kind of heaviness that doesn't come from lack of sleep. Linda sat beside me and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Margaret, dear, we need to talk about the sleeping arrangements," she said softly. "Richard and I can perfectly well take the sofa bed. You should be in the guest room. This is your celebration." Richard nodded firmly. "It's not kindness," he added. "It's basic decency." Ashley appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned. "Mom, Dad, we talked about this," she said quickly, her smile stretched too tight. "Margaret insisted on this arrangement. She said she wanted us to have the master for our anniversary." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Your anniversary is in 3 months, Ashley," she replied, her voice suddenly cool. And we never heard Margaret say anything of the sort. David wandered in with a coffee mug in hand, frowning at the atmosphere. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother-in-law," Richard said carefully, "is sleeping on a sofa while her guests and her son occupy the bedrooms of the house she booked and paid for. We are discussing how inappropriate that is." David blinked, clearly thrown. "Ashley said Mom preferred it," he muttered. Ashley's jaw clenched. "Can we not make a big deal out of this?" she snapped. "Margaret is very flexible. She told me herself." The doorbell interrupted her, a sharp sound that cut through the rising tension. I stood. "That'll be the first surprise," I said quietly. Ashley's brows knit together as she followed us to the deck overlooking the driveway. A catering truck from one of the most exclusive restaurants in Provincetown pulled up, followed by a florist van and a party rental truck. Margaret Ashley breathed eyes wide. "What is all this?" I smiled. "My birthday," I said simply. "I thought we should celebrate properly." David's jaw tightened as he watched uniformed staff begin unloading tables, linens trays of food. "Mom, this looks extremely expensive," he said. "Are you sure about all this?" I let out a small laugh that surprised even me. "Oh, David," I replied, feeling something strong and steady rise up inside me. "I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly who can afford what around here." The second surprise arrived in a sleek black sedan at 9:30 a.m. My attorney, Patricia Williams, stepped out tall and composed in a navy blazer carrying a leather briefcase. She climbed the steps to the deck and shook my hand warmly. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, "this property is even more beautiful in person." "It is," I agreed, "and so much more interesting with an audience." Ashley's eyes narrowed. "Margaret, why is there an attorney here?" She demanded, the first crack of real fear in her voice. I turned to the group. "Everyone, this is Patricia Williams, my lawyer," I said calmly. "Patricia, these are my son David, my daughter-in-law Ashley and Ashley's parents, Richard and Linda." Patricia offered them a professional smile. "Mrs. Peterson asked me to bring some documents," she explained. "Just a few clarifications about property rights and financial responsibilities." Before Ashley could form her next protest, the third surprise turned into the driveway, a modest moving truck, the kind used for quick relocations. Ashley's face went slack as two men in work shirts climbed out and headed toward the house. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "What is that?" I sat down in my deck chair, suddenly feeling very, very 70 and very, very powerful. That, I said gently, is what happens when someone forgets whose name is on the lease. Ashley's face drained of color as the movers began carrying her designer luggage down the stairs. "Margaret, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. Her parents stood frozen, watching the parade of boxes and suitcases pass through the front door. "Oh, but I'm not doing anything," I said softly. "Patricia, would you mind explaining the situation to everyone?" Patricia opened her briefcase with that calm precision only good lawyers possess. "Mrs. Peterson holds the exclusive rental agreement for this property," she said. "Legally, she determines who occupies it. When guests misrepresent their role in organizing or funding an event, it can constitute grounds for removal." Ashley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Linda gasped. Richard looked like he wanted to sink into the deck boards. David finally spoke, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just throw us out. We're family." I met his eyes. "Are we?" I asked quietly. "Because family doesn't suggest their mothers sleep on the floor. Family doesn't lie about who paid for a celebration." Richard turned slowly to his daughter. "Ashley," he said carefully, "did you tell us Margaret wanted to sleep on the sofa?" Ashley's voice faltered. "Dad, this is all a misunderstanding. Margaret's been acting strange lately." I was just trying to manage what Linda cut in her voice sharp now. "Because from where I'm standing, Margaret seems perfectly lucid. You're the one who's been twisting the truth." Patricia lifted a folder from her briefcase. "Perhaps this will help clarify," she said. "Here's the rental agreement signed solely by Mrs. Peterson, along with receipts for catering flowers and the entire weekend's expenses, totaling roughly $8,000. Richard's expression darkened. $8,000, he repeated. "Ashley, did you know Margaret was spending that much?" Ashley's words stumbled out. "It wasn't supposed to be that expensive." Linda's voice came out like cold steel. "Because you weren't paying for it." That's when Ashley broke. She dropped to her knees beside me, clutching my hands like a desperate child. "Margaret, please," she whispered, mascara streaking her cheeks. "I didn't mean those things about the floor. I was just stressed, trying to make sure everyone was comfortable. By taking the room I reserved, I asked gently." Richard stepped forward, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Ashley, stand up. This is undignified." But she stayed kneeling, trembling. "Please don't throw us out," she begged. "This is your birthday weekend. We can work this out." I looked at her, the daughter-in-law I'd once welcomed with open arms, the woman who'd called me Margaret, like it was an insult. "Can we?" I asked. "Because I remember exactly what you said yesterday. She can sleep on the floor." "Not even the sofa. The floor." Linda inhaled sharply. "The floor," she repeated, turning to her daughter in disbelief. "Ashley, you said that about Margaret?" The silence that followed was devastating. Ashley's eyes darted around the room, searching for escape. "It was a joke," she whispered. "It was cruelty," Richard corrected, his voice shaking. Patricia cleared her throat politely. Mrs. Peterson has arranged alternate accommodations at the Anchor Inn down the road. Lovely little place, very cozy. Shared facilities, continental breakfast, shared bathroom. Ashley's head snapped up. Shared bathroom, she echoed in horror. At your age, I said sweetly, I thought you might appreciate a more authentic experience. Linda pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Ashley, she said softly, what have you become? David stepped forward, voice cracking. Mom, if you've paid for everything, let me reimburse you. I tilted my head. With what money, David? He froze. You've received over $70,000 from me in the past 18 months. Where has it gone? Richard turned sharply to his daughter. $70,000, he repeated in disbelief. Ashley stammered. David needed help, and I was just... You were just what Linda demanded. Using Margaret's generosity to fund your lifestyle. I looked at Ashley, her perfect hair now limp and tangled, her designer dress wrinkled. I want my son back, I said quietly. Not the man who lets his wife humiliate his mother. Not the boy who forgets basic gratitude. Richard nodded. That's reasonable, Margaret. An hour later, the manager from the Anchor Inn called. Mrs. Peterson, she said your daughter-in-law seems upset. She's asking if you'll cover an upgrade to a suite since her card was declined. I smiled into the phone. Absolutely not. She's responsible for her own charges. When I hung up, Linda shook her head, tears in her eyes. Margaret, I owe you an apology, she whispered. We raised Ashley to be better than this. I squeezed her hand gently. You did, I said. You're good people. You're just seeing who she's chosen to be. Richard's voice was quiet, thick with grief. We never taught her to take credit for someone else's kindness, he said. I don't understand where this came from. Neither do I admitted. But before the sadness could settle, Patricia returned from her car, carrying another stack of folders. Mrs. Peterson, she said, her eyes serious. There are additional details we should discuss, and Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, you deserve to know the rest. Patricia set her folders down on the dining table with deliberate care. Over the past 6 months, she began, Mrs. Peterson and I have been monitoring certain financial irregularities patterns that pointed to more than just casual misuse of generosity. Linda's face paled. Financial irregularities, she repeated. Patricia nodded. Roughly $70,000 Margaret provided as assistance to David and Ashley, allegedly for mortgage help and household expenses, did not go where it was intended. Richard leaned forward, his jaw tightening. Then where did it go? Patricia met his eyes. About $30,000 covered legitimate expenses. The remaining $40,000 was redirected to luxury purchases, private debts, and personal accounts not associated with their household. Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. You can't just... We can. I interrupted quietly because I've been watching. You see, I didn't want to believe you were capable of this, Ashley. I wanted to think maybe I was just imagining your cruelty. But the numbers don't lie. Linda pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Private debts, she asked weakly. What kind of debts? Patricia opened another folder. Pre-existing ones, she said. From before Ashley married David. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the sound of the ocean outside seemed to hold its breath. I spoke softly because my voice felt steadier when it didn't need to rise. When Harold passed, I tried to fill my days with something meaningful. Helping my son felt like a purpose. Every check I wrote, every transfer I made, it felt like family, until I realized my kindness had become someone else's income. David looked shell-shocked. Ashley, he said slowly. What debts is she talking about? Ashley's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's not what you think, she said finally. I had some obligations from before, and I didn't want to burden you. Obligations you hid, I murmured. Patricia glanced at me. It gets worse, she said softly. When Mrs. Peterson began asking questions, we expanded our search. What we found was a pattern similar behavior in her previous relationships. Richard frowned. Previous relationships, Patricia slid a document across the table. A divorce decree from Connecticut dated 8 months before Ashley met David. Her ex-husband, a man named Robert Hutchkins, filed citing financial misrepresentation, undisclosed debts, and credit accounts opened without his consent. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. She told us she'd been single for 2 years, she whispered. She lied to us. Patricia opened another folder revealing photographs. And this, she said, is Ashley at a charity event 3 years ago with a widower named James Morrison. He passed away last year after changing his will to include her. His children later contacted authorities about missing funds. Linda made a small, broken sound. Dear God, Richard's voice came out low and dangerous. What are you implying? Counselor Patricia held his gaze. That Ashley has a history of targeting financially stable individuals, building trust, and then exploiting it. Sometimes romantically, sometimes through family. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk about Ashley urgently. I have information about her other victims. MB. I showed it to Patricia. She checked the sender and frowned. Marcus Brennan, she said. According to our records, Ashley's brother. Richard's head snapped up. Marcus. We haven't heard from him in years. Linda looked confused. Ashley told us he was unstable, that we shouldn't contact him. Patricia folded her hands. That seems to be part of the pattern, isolating anyone who might expose her behavior. Richard's face went ashen. Are you saying our daughter has been manipulating everyone around her? I finished for him. Yes. Before anyone could speak, the sound of tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Patricia glanced out the window. That might be him. Moments later, a man in his 40s stepped onto the porch, thin, tired-looking, but with eyes that carried the weight of too much truth. Mrs. Peterson, he asked softly. I'm Marcus Brennan. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Linda rushed forward. Marcus, she cried, wrapping her arms around him. We've missed you. Marcus hugged her back, but kept his gaze fixed on his sister, who had gone completely still at the sight of him. Ashley, he said quietly, I warned you this would catch up with you someday. Ashley's voice trembled. Marcus, you shouldn't be here. You don't know what you're talking about. He set a worn briefcase on the table, his movement steady despite the tension crackling through the room. Actually, he said, opening it. I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I have the documentation to prove it. He spread out papers, bank transfers, screenshots, handwritten notes, even what looked like surveillance logs. Patricia scanned them quickly, her brow furrowing. These are detailed, she murmured. Extremely detailed. Marcus nodded. Ashley studies her targets, he said. She tracks their habits, their spending, their vulnerabilities. I've seen her do it for years. I tried to stop her before she destroyed another family. David's voice was tight. What do you mean, studies her targets? Marcus turned toward him. She learns people, what they need, what they fear. Then she becomes exactly who they want until she's in control. Ashley slammed her hands on the table, her composure unraveling. He's lying. He's always been jealous of me enough, Richard said sharply, his tone like thunder. We've heard enough lies for a lifetime. Patricia looked up from the documents. Mrs. Peterson, she said quietly, these records show detailed notes on your daily routines, your swimming schedule, your appointments, even your friends' names. David stared at his wife in horror. Ashley, why would you write down my mother's routines? Ashley's voice cracked. I was trying to understand her better. To connect Marcus met her eyes unflinching. No, you were mapping her life, just like you mapped your last 3 victims. The silence that followed felt like a void swallowing the air from the room. I looked at her. This woman who'd married my son, eaten at my table, smiled in my home, and finally said what we were all thinking. You didn't marry into this family, Ashley. You infiltrated it. The moment I said those words, it was like something shattered inside the room. Ashley's shoulders stiffened, her face frozen in that brittle mask of pride that had carried her through every lie she'd ever told. That's not true, she whispered, shaking her head. I love David. I love this family." Her voice cracked on the word love as if even it refused to believe her. David's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on her with a kind of numb disbelief. "You love this family," he repeated quietly. "Then why do you have surveillance notes on my mother's life? Why did you take her money and lie about it? Why did you tell your own parents she should sleep on the floor?" The last question hit like a hammer. Ashley turned toward him, desperate now. "I was joking. It was just a stupid comment. You're all blowing it out of proportion." Linda's voice sliced through hers like glass. "It wasn't a joke, Ashley. It was cruelty, and it told us exactly who you are." Marcus opened another folder, his tone grim but calm. "She's done this before David. With Robert Hutchkins, she manipulated his accounts and isolated him from friends. With James Morrison, she convinced him to change his will. You're not the first. And if Margaret hadn't caught on, you wouldn't have been the last." Richard stood up slowly, his voice low and shaking. "Ashley Marie Hartwell," he said, using her full name like a sentence. "Look at me." She hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes. "How much money do you owe?" And the question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. 90,000, she said. "Maybe a little more." Linda gasped. $90,000. From what Ashley wiped her face with trembling hands. Old debts. From before David. From situations that didn't end well. Marcus added quietly, "She's been using new relationships to pay off old ones. It's a pattern that's been escalating for years." David was pale now, gripping the edge of the table like he needed it to stay upright. "So all those emergencies," he said slowly, "the car repairs, the medical bills, the investment opportunity, you lied about all of them." Ashley reached for him, but he pulled back. "David, please," she said. "You don't understand." "No," he said, his voice trembling. "I finally do." Patricia cleared her throat softly, professional even in the chaos. "Mrs. Peterson, I should inform you that the Connecticut State Police have been investigating similar cases involving Ms. Hartwell." My phone buzzed almost on cue. "It's them," Patricia said after checking the screen. "They'd like to speak with you." I answered, my hand steady despite the weight of everything. "Mrs. Peterson," the detective's voice said, "this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Connecticut State Police. We've been tracking a financial manipulation case connected to an individual named Ashley Hartwell Peterson. It appears you may be one of several victims." Ashley's lips parted, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Victims," she whispered. The detective continued, "We'd like to meet with you and your family. We've uncovered documents linking Mrs. Peterson's daughter-in-law to prior fraud investigations and elder financial abuse cases across 3 states. When I hung up, no one spoke. Even the waves outside seemed to still, as if the entire world was holding its breath. David sank back into his chair, the full scope of it finally crashing over him. "Elder abuse." He repeated softly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "You stole from my mother, Ashley. You lied to everyone. You used me." Ashley's voice broke. "No, I didn't mean to. I was scared. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out." Richard's voice rose unsteady with grief and anger. "You've humiliated this family, manipulated a grieving widow, and destroyed your marriage with your own greed. You've become a stranger to us." Linda was crying openly now. "You weren't raised to be this way. We loved you, Ashley. We gave you everything." Ashley's gaze darted between all of us, her facade cracking completely. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I was drowning in debt. I didn't know how to stop." "You stop," I said quietly, "by not pushing others under with you." David stood, his hands trembling, but his voice finally steady. "Ashley, I have one question left. Did you target me because my father died?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Ashley's tears stopped. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And in that silence, every answer he needed was already there. Marcus spoke softly. "She researches obituaries, David. She looks for families grieving a recent loss where the son or daughter is vulnerable and the parent has financial stability. David exhaled shakily, his voice breaking. "So you didn't love me. You saw me as a strategy." "David, that's not true." "It's exactly true," he said, his tone now cold, resolved. "You didn't fall in love with me. You calculated me." Richard's face was hard with sorrow. "Ashley, you need to leave," he said. "You've hurt everyone in this room, and until you face the truth, you have no place among us." Ashley stood her breath, uneven eyes wild. "This isn't over," she whispered. "You'll all regret this." I looked at her calmly. "No, Ashley," I said, my voice firm but quiet. "For the first time, it really is." She turned and walked out the door, her heels clattering across the wooden deck, her shadow shrinking in the afternoon light. None of us spoke until the sound of her car faded into the distance. David sat down again, his face buried in his hands. "How did I miss it?" he whispered. "How did I not see what she was doing to us?" Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Because people like Ashley make sure you don't. They study kindness the way predators study movement. You couldn't have known." Richard nodded grimly. "But now we do. And now we stop letting her define who we are." Outside, the ocean kept moving, endless and unbothered, whispering like it always had. Somewhere between the waves and the silence of that house, I realized something had shifted in me, too. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was taking my life back. That night, after everyone left and the last traces of sunset melted into darkness, I sat alone on the deck, listening to the waves. The house was finally still, again peaceful, in a way it hadn't been since I arrived. I thought about how quickly kindness can be mistaken for weakness, how easy it is for people to confuse gentleness with surrender. But I wasn't the same woman who had arrived here 2 days earlier, dripping from the pool and clutching a towel while my son's wife planned to make me sleep on the floor. That version of me had been adaptable. This one was awake. The next morning, the phone rang just after 7 a.m. Patricia's calm voice came through the line. "Margaret, the police have located Ashley," she said. "She was arrested at the Massachusetts border. She had multiple IDs, financial documents, and a list of potential new victims." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. "Thank you, Patricia." My voice sounded older than I remembered, but steady. "What happens now?" "The district attorney will likely pursue charges for fraud and elder financial abuse across several states. You'll be contacted for a statement." When I hung up, the world outside felt different, brighter, sharper, almost too real. David came down the stairs, his hair-tousled eyes heavy from a sleepless night. "That was the police," I said softly. "They've arrested her." He stood in silence for a long moment, then nodded. "Good." He sat beside me, staring out at the water. "Part of me still wants to understand her," he admitted, "to know why she did it." "Some people can't be understood," I said gently. Only stopped. Over the next few days, Richard and Linda stayed in touch constantly. They were broken but resolute, determined to help the police and make amends for their daughter's choices. Marcus, too, became a quiet fixture in our lives. He helped Patricia organize evidence, contacted other families, and began to speak publicly about financial exploitation. It was strange finding friendship in the wreckage Ashley had left behind, but maybe that's how healing begins, with people who refuse to let pain be the final word. 3 months later, the letter from the district attorney arrived. Ashley had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of financial abuse and fraud. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with restitution ordered for all her victims. I sat on my porch that morning, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, the sunlight washing the paper gold. David came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Good news?" he asked. "Justice," I said. "It's something." He sat beside me, exhaling slowly. "Part of me still feels sorry for her," he admitted. 5 years is a long time. I shook my head. 5 years isn't punishment, David. It's protection for everyone else she might have hurt. He nodded, understanding. Since that weekend, he'd been rebuilding his life piece by piece. He'd moved back into his old room, temporarily repainting my kitchen, fixing the broken railing on the porch, slowly reclaiming the pieces of himself she had scattered. Patricia had managed to recover most of the money Ashley had stolen, and David insisted on paying back every cent he'd unknowingly taken. It would take years, but he said it was the only way he could forgive himself. And then one afternoon he handed me an envelope. A job offer, he said, smiling faintly. A firm in Boston. They help develop programs to prevent elder financial abuse. I opened it and read the details. It's perfect, I said. You'd be turning what happened into something that helps people. I wanted to ask your permission first, he said softly. It'll mean traveling sometimes. I don't want you to feel alone. I laughed quietly. David, I'm 70, not helpless. I can manage a few quiet evenings without supervision. For the first time in months, he smiled, really smiled, and it lit his whole face like the boy I used to know. That weekend, Richard and Linda arrived with grocery bags and fresh flowers. Sunday dinner delivery, Linda announced with a small laugh. We thought you might be tired of cooking for one. I hugged her, something warm filling my chest. You're always welcome here, I said. This is what families should feel like. We cooked together as the late light spilled through the windows. David set the table while Marcus poured wine. When we sat down, Linda lifted her glass. To second chances, she said. Richard added, to strong women who refuse to be underestimated. David smiled. To families that choose honesty even when it hurts. I raised my own glass last. To peace, and to remembering that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Outside, the ocean whispered its endless rhythm the same way it had that first afternoon. But this time, it didn't sound mournful. It sounded alive. I thought about everything I'd lost my husband, my illusions, my patience, and what I'd gained in return respect. Truth and a new family made not by blood, but by choice. Ashley once called me a lonely old widow who could sleep on the floor. But as I sat surrounded by people who cared laughter and candlelight warming the room, I finally understood something. You can't control who betrays you. You can only control what you build afterward. And I had built something stronger than revenge peace. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us of the strength we often forget we have. And if you've ever rebuilt your life after betrayal, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it.